Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. My full name is Rajvansh Sandhu, but you can call me Raj because it's a bit of a mouthful. So today I'm going to be speaking about managing multicultural teams. So I think it's a topic that's very close to all of our hearts. I would assume, working and living in a multicultural environment today. And I'm just sharing a little bit of my experience and knowledge in this space, and hopefully that will be able to be beneficial to you. And of course, I would love to hear back any suggestions or ideas that you may have as well as part of your experience, to learn. So it will be quite an interactive session. I only have 5 or 6 slides, so it's not going to be a death by PowerPoint. I'm just going to try to kind of talk through some of the key points. Feel free to stop me if you have a question, but we also have a bit of time at the end so that we can address any other questions that may come through. If you can see my screen, I'll just move on to the agenda or the content. So I'll give you a bit of a background of myself, and then we'll do a bit of a kind of a context or scene setting. Then we talk around strategies to handle, situations and, people and conversations, to see how can we, communicate better, understand better, and also ultimately perform better, right? And understand each other better as well. And then, as I mentioned, we have Q&A session at the end. So a little bit about myself. So I'm working in BAT, British American Tobacco. Have been for quite a few years, about 19 years now. And what I'm doing currently is I'm the head of platforms for ERP and marketing. So really what that means is that I head the DevSecOps organization, or basically the delivery engine of all the global marketing and ERP platforms within BAT. And we cover, depending on the scope of the IT systems that we're, or IT platforms that we're running, it could cut across 200 markets, for example, like our SAP is a global solution, or it could be a combination of regional markets, or systems that cover large common market archetypes, like for example 30 over markets that we have in the Salesforce space, and so on and so forth. So depending on kind of like the business need, the size of the market, the maturity of the business, and so on and so forth. Overall, I have about 27 odd years experience. So prior to joining BAT, I was working in a startup for 5 years. And I went there mainly because I wanted to kind of experience working in a bit of a non-traditional company. So after I graduated from university, I started working in Ernst & Young in management consulting. So starting as a junior consultant and so on and so forth. And very structured accounting firm in those days, which is quite a long time ago. Probably when you guys were in your diapers, that's when I was starting work. So and then I said, okay, there was a dot-com boom in the year 2000. I said, okay, I want to try something completely different. I went to a startup, and it was quite an eye-opening experience for me, in terms of doing everything from A to Z, rather than a consulting type of structure where you have very distinct roles and responsibilities. But working in a startup was also quite interesting, because after about a year or two, the investor who was funding the company decided to pull out. So we then had to go alone, and there was a whole series of downsizing that happened, and so on and so forth. So it gave me a different kind of perspective in terms of whether I really enjoy working in a large company or a smaller company, and so on and so forth, right? Then I moved on to BAT, and I've done various kind of market roles, regional and global roles within BAT. So in terms of my experience in managing multicultural teams, so generally since I started managing regional teams, I'm head of IT in Southeast Asia. I have managed global marketing support teams out of Malaysia, but they are covering having teams in Poland, in Hungary, in Romania, in Brazil, Mexico, and then also in KL in Malaysia. And then what I have now is that I have my main team is sitting out in Poland. So, but I also have satellite teams out, and these are BAT employees or BAT teams out in Malaysia and Mexico. But because we have a heavy outsourcing type of approach in terms of our commodity IT services, so we work with a lot of our teams are based in India through our 2 to 3 main partners there, right? So obviously different kinds of cultures. Like in every call, you have different people from different countries in that call, depending on the time zone. And it gets quite interesting how you need to kind of understand each other, especially when you have a new team forming, and getting to know individuals and understanding where they're coming from. All of that takes a bit of uh, time, skill, and also being able to be open-minded about situations, right? So I'm a Malaysian, and I'm now living in Poland as part of my new role. I moved last year, and really liking it over here. Of course, the weather's better now, so that definitely helps. But it's great over here, with my family in Poland. And interest wise, if you see my interest on the screen, like to garden, play tennis, and so on and so forth. So that's me, and that's my photo there. And I was also nominated as one of the Empower role models out of the Involve Top 100 list. And it's a nice list that recognizes people who are promoting diversity and inclusion in their companies. So I was really blessed to be able to be recognized for that this year. Okay, enough of myself. So the whole intention of kind of explaining where I'm working and where I'm coming from is to help to give you a bit of a context or understanding that around the kind of experience that I've had, so that you know that some of these tips or these suggestions that we will be discussing are actually things that have worked and will work, right? So just to give you a bit of how do you say, comfort that these are resources that do work, right? So from a scene setting perspective, I guess what I try to do is do a bit of design thinking to put myself in your shoes. And these are my shoes too, and I've worn them before. I currently wear them too. So what are the situations that we have where we might be dealing with multicultural teams? So one scene setting I thought would be, you are managing a team of different culture, people from different cultures. Okay, so it's a bit of a typo there, different cultures. So for example, as I mentioned to you, in my team I have in Poland I have probably a majority of the my Polish team are from Poland itself, or Polish people. But I also have a fairly significant number of people from Ukraine. And before moving to Poland, I have never actually worked with people from Ukraine, or have to manage them. So that's quite interesting as well for me from a different perspective. And then I have one of the guys who worked in my team. He's actually from Honduras, but he's living in Mexico. So again, kind of a Latin culture, which is quite similar across that whole group of countries in South and Central America. And then, of course, in terms of a group of people from Malaysia who I would understand quite well, because we are the same, similar culture. But then working with people from the different markets, you have, across the board, right? 200 markets, you can imagine some you speak to more often than not. And then, how do you kind of are able to adapt to the way they communicate, what they mean, and so on and so forth. So I'll give you some examples a bit later. Then the second one is that you may, as part of your role, manage a team of onshore and offshore resources, which then actually means that there could be people that you've never met before as part of your offshore, team, right? Your partners, your suppliers, meaning, suppliers slash vendors, teams which are, from your company as well, which are sitting in a different country altogether. You probably have never met and may end up never meeting because of travel constraints and COVID and all of that, right? So that happens. I'll just give you an example. A couple of months ago, I've been working in BAT for such a long time, right? I actually met a colleague of mine from Brazil who I've never met before, but I've worked with on and off for the last 19 years. And that was the first time I had met him. And it was so nice, right? Like just to see someone face to face for the first time and really like connect in the flesh, right? Which was just really really nice. So it feels as if you've had this friend for so long and then suddenly you meet that person. So but there are many cases, of course, that you may just never end up meeting some of the people that you work with, right? So how do you manage that? And the last one is that you may or may not report to a line manager who's of a different culture and speak a different first language. So my boss is French. I have been reporting to him for a number of years now. When we first started working together, it was quite challenging for both of us. Our common language is English. But how we um, understood each other was quite different, right? So, so I'll just give you an example of the first situation, right? You manage a team of cultural team members, so different cultures team members, right? So if I give you an example, so for example, when I was managing a team out in Japan and Korea, the culture there is quite hierarchical, and so therefore, then what the boss says will be followed. Generally, right? That's again, I apologize. I'm just using kind of some generalizations here of obviously the exceptions to the rule, but it's quite hierarchical, and they follow what the boss says or what the boss wants you get. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's acceptance of decisions. And when you do seek feedback in a formal setting, for example, in a meeting, if you're managing people in Japan, Korea, in the sorry, okay, in the East Asian cultures, seeking feedback or their opinion about a situation or about a decision, um, in a formal structure, you may not get the right feedback, right? Because it's general, people are a little shy and they prefer to give their feedback more in one-to-one settings rather than in team settings, right? So in situations such as these, if you do want to seek feedback and input, you might need to actually adapt or change your management style a little bit to seek feedback one-to-one and kind of hear concerns and then be able to acknowledge what those concerns are, and then obviously agree if there's any action plan that's required. So just to kind of summarize that, it may require a bit more time because it's more consultative decision making rather than and consultative opinion seeking rather than kind of we have one meeting, you tell me what you feel, and then we all come to a decision together, right? So that's one of my experience there, right? The other experience that I have here is in the Western world, when you manage teams in the Western world, for example, like where I am now, etc. Social events in the evening, for example, we go for drinks to the pub and so on and so forth, are very common and very acceptable. But if you work in with Asian teams, for example, I'm Malaysian and Malaysians love to eat, and you could probably say that across quite a lot of different Asian countries as well. A lot of the team activity is centered around food, right, and around lunchtime. So if we need to have a team lunch, a team activity like a team event, rather than a dinner, you would get more participation from people at the lunchtime because they're at the office, they're there, and having that team lunch is part of their responsibility of being in your team, right? But if you have it like later in the evening as a team event at night, you may not necessarily get the optimum number of people attending because they feel that they need to go home and spend time with their families and so on and so forth. So again, it's just a little bit of understanding and flex, right? From that perspective. Then secondly, it's around managing the team of onshore and offshore resources, right? So my experience here is we work a lot with our vendor teams which are offshore in India. And managing a vendor team in India, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the different teams you work with are all of the same how do you say it, language or culture, right? Because there's like 50 over languages in India. You could actually be having a team of 50 people with everyone from a different place with a different type of culture and the way they then respond to you as well, right? So what I'm trying to say is don't kind of assume that you're going to use a blanket approach, especially if you've never kind of been to that country or you've never met the people. Seek to understand a little bit more about where they're from. Are they working online or offline, from home, or they hybrid in the office, and that can kind of determine as well how they participate in Teams meeting. They might turn on their camera if they're actually working from home, because they may have a family that they live with, like the parents or the parents-in-law, and a more extended family, so they would not actually turn on their camera. So don't feel how do you say, uh, I don't know whether upset is the right word, but maybe like slighted that everyone's got a camera on but they don't, right? So these are kind of maybe some of the nuances there. And then if I go to the third situation that I have, and just to explain to you a little bit. So when my boss and I first started working together, sorry, let me have a bit of water. Our common language was English. It still is English, but um, the way so my first language is English, so and I'm very comfortable. But the way I understood certain things, for example, if we have a meeting together and we agree that this is the way forward on a certain decision or a plan of action, initially when I first started working with my boss, he would say a certain thing but actually mean something a little different, and I would misinterpret it, right? So after a few 2 to 3 situations where I misunderstood, luckily not badly, but I misunderstood what he was saying and vice versa, we decided between each of us that okay, we were going to reconfirm what we said, right? So if he said something and I will say, okay, so you told me that, and what you mean is X, Y, Z. And he said, yeah, Raj, that's right. That's what I mean. Or no, I don't actually, I mean blah, 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 blah. So and so on and so forth. And from my perspective as well, when I say this is what I mean, right? So that has really helped to kind of make sure that we are always in the common direction and we have a common way forward and we understand what we're doing. And the other thing as well is maybe this is not really related to managing, cross-cultural teams, but more, it's also around your line manager's working style. So my boss is quite a visual guy. So if you have a conversation with him and you're in a one-to-one and you say you're talking about something, you tend to lose his interest after a while because his mind is somewhere else and he will lose attention if he doesn't see a slide, right? So doesn't necessarily have to be a fantastic slide. Even if we just put a couple of bullets, right? I've learned over time to say that, okay, if I need to speak to him about something really important, I should just put in like 3-4 bullets and say, okay, this is what we're covering today and this is what I need from you. And that's helped to bridge, that gap, right? Because then he will say, no, or yes, and okay, I get what you mean, and I know, and so it's really helped to kind of cut out a lot of misunderstanding, right? Um, okay, so if I then go to the strategies, right? So I guess this is just how I kind of like took this is no methodology that I followed from anywhere. It's just I took my experience and kind of thought, okay, how best to put that experience and contextualize it into like a strategy that's understandable for everybody when they actually see this slide. So for me, it's like a 3A strategy, I would say. The first step is acknowledgement. So it's really, when you come together in a team or you work in a team, even over time, right, is that acknowledge that the way you work could be different, which would then mean that, some are morning people, some are evening people. Some come into a call and, they're chirpy straight away. Others are quiet and they warm up after a while. The second one is how we communicate. So, the way we communicate could be slightly different, as I mentioned. Some people like to keep their questions right to the end. Some, would interrupt you during our presentation and ask questions because they seek to clarify rather than kind of look at the big picture and then ask right at the end, right? And then language barriers is the third one, which I explained to you a little bit more. So from a language, I won't say it's a language barrier per se, but understanding people's behavior as well. So when I first started working with Eastern Europeans, Eastern European culture is very direct and very straight to the point, and yeah, so being direct doesn't necessarily being rude, but it's just stating your point and this is what it is, right? Where else in Asian culture, it's a bit more kind of flowery and around, people kind of like, trying to maybe, and I think it's quite similar with English. I've worked with English or British culture as well, where people kind of try to contextualize and, explain things before they actually tell you what they mean, right? So it's slightly different depending on who you're working with, right? I think body language is a big one as well, especially when we're working in remotely on camera like we are today. When we turn on the camera, we just have to be really cautious about how we're being perceived by the people on the call, right? So for example, the way you sit, or like their expression on your face says a million words that you may not even say. And also how we think. So we all may think slightly differently. So it's just to kind of acknowledge that being different and bring different people around the table from different cultures who speak different languages is not a bad thing, but it's just being able to understand those differences and work with them, right? And that kind of takes you to the second strategy, which is the acceptance. So the acceptance is, as I mentioned to you earlier, is being adaptable and understanding the differences. So, from my perspective, I've managed teams of, like, for example, direct reports of, different cultures, or even across different countries, etc. Like today, my the people who that report directly into me, they're four individuals. They sit in either Poland, Mexico, or KL, and the way they um, work and communicate is slightly different depending on the individual's personality as well as the culture, right? So I try to, as a line manager, be a bit more adaptive as well. So there are some common ground, common behaviors that we all understand, which is required of each other. But then the adaptability is quite important. So, like for example, one of the guys who reports into me, he is he's quite reserved in his comments, but that doesn't mean that he is accepting, right? So I try to use a different kind of strategy with him to actually, ask him questions and give him time to open up and understand what the picture is, so that he's able to feel comfortable enough to ask the questions. And then I have another person who is super direct, and super, to the point, and he's, like, he will say something, but he doesn't feel, he feels comfortable enough to say what he feels and means without feeling being judged, which is a great thing, right? But he's more like the, like, on point all the time. So then, it's in when we have a meeting together, it's ensuring that the people who are talking more or speaking more give a chance to those who speak less, right? So it's playing a bit of a role of a moderator as well is quite important. And these kind of personalities is also your individual personality combined with your cultural kind of background, or your understanding of the language and the common language that you speak as well, right? And then ask and clarify. So I think that's the best thing to do. If you're not sure, for example, if you're being rude in a different culture, or you're being you're making presumptions or assumptions, just ask and clarify, right? um so um it's always best to not assume, because you may end up making the wrong assumption and actually offending people. So asking and clarifying is it's absolutely fine. And I think the last strategy here is assimilation, right? So, I think when in Rome, I think that's a pretty famous saying that, I mean, if you are, living in a new country or in a different country like I am now, which I'm, blessed to be able to do, it's just being able to try to assimilate as much as I can into the way people live here and the culture, and the way they are, rather than complaining it's different from where you come from or different from what you're used to, right? And then the second one, the differences are not bad. I think that's, I think we are all um familiar with what that means, right? But as humans, we tend to, I think, congregate or kind of like go towards people who are similar to us, because we feel that that is a commonality that we have. We may eat the same food or come from the same place. We have the similar experiences in childhood, a similar culture, or we may speak the similar language, and so on and so forth. But I think being able to kind of like try at least like every day or every week, find someone who's of a different culture from you, and speak to them and understand where they're coming from, or have lunch with them at work, or be able to make friends from different cultures is actually really fantastic. And the last one is flexibility. Obviously, when you manage multicultural teams, you have to be really flexible as well. In my previous role, I was working out of KL in the global role, and obviously time zone is quite an issue, because when there are calls and meetings in Europe, I have to attend, but it's evening for me, but it's early morning for someone else in Latin America, right? So it's just being able to find a way to accommodate everyone, so that you're able to have everybody in that right conversation and in the same conversation, but also be flexible to think that, okay, you can't have a call that's too late, because that would impact somebody in Asia, versus too early, because that would mean someone in Latin America would have to wake up at 4 a.m., right? So and maybe a little give and take. So today I work late, tomorrow you wake up early, so that you are able to then achieve a cohesive way of working in a team, especially when people are in different time zones. So I guess that's all from me. So it's about I've about 30 minutes of content and conversation. Do you have any questions that you might want to ask, or do you like to offer any ideas or suggestions to me as well? I'm happy to have any kind of dialogue. Are there any in the chat, Kevin? Let me check. Nope.
Sorry, mate. No, so no questions came through, but I think that's because the quality of the content. I'm not sure if somebody's about to come back and carry next to the camera's changed.
I haven't got any questions. I think that's been quite a useful overview, to be fair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Kevin,
I think somebody has a question.
Yes, I have a question. You did say earlier that when you have a team that is multicultural, it does help having that face-to-face time, and you gave an example of going out to lunch, for example. So how do you manage with a team that is spread across the world? You are in an organization where you have a travel ban. You've probably never even met your team before, and they certainly have never met each other.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So we actually started this really heavily during COVID, right? Because nobody could travel anywhere. We were working across the world and like crazy hours and all of that. So we started doing informal drinks sessions, for example. Finding a time slot where, okay, maybe people in Latin America couldn't join because it's early morning for them, but at least where there's a common time zone where groups could actually meet socially over Teams. To have drinks together or chit chat. We actually organized a couple of farewells for people who left the organization during COVID, and had farewell drinks online over Teams, and we then continued that tradition. So we do that over like monthly and quarterly town halls, and then at the end of the year we have like a Christmas gathering, maybe like 2 weeks before Christmas. So like we call it our year-end online party, where everybody gets together and we do a little bit of a recap of year end, how we have done, what we want to focus on in the following year. But then, just socializing online, which is not that easy. It can be a little awkward initially, but after people kind of warm up, it's good. So we, put on our Christmas hats. So whoever who's got the most interesting kind of hat or headgear will get a gift or a prize. We do like online quizzes and comment and things like that, right? So that has been one way to actually break that barrier, because the chances are, you're right, you're just never going to end up meeting some of these people, right?
Yeah.
And we do that with our vendors as well. So we have like yearly half yearly and yearly town halls where we get all these vendor teams who we use for outsourcing. So we're talking about like 200-300 people who join a town hall with us, and then we explain like our company strategy, where we're going, what we've done, what role they play, so that they understand the bigger picture around how they help to achieve our business results, and they're just not solving a ticket or closing a CR or delivering a user story or whatever. So yeah, so yeah, that's those are a few strategies.
Thank you.
Most welcome.
Can you see the two questions in the chat there, Raj?
Yeah, so maybe I'll go to Mary's question. Do you enjoy it after all these years? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So I come from a multicultural country. Malaysia is very multicultural. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to go there. So we have three main cultures in Malaysia. So Chinese, Indian, and Malay. And so I have an Indian background. So I have ancestors who came from India, but I'm fourth generation Malaysian. So, but it's definitely a melting pot. I mean, I myself speak 4 languages. So I always have this kind of mindset that, being multilingual or having friends of different cultures is actually a very positive thing, which is one of the reasons why I also came to Poland, because I wanted to kind of continue to encourage my son to, to be taught that way and grow that way as well, to live in a completely different culture, in a European culture, which we've never done before, which is, eye-opening for us coming from an Asian culture, right? So definitely I enjoy it. Definitely enjoy it after all these years. And then how do you balance for the amount of awarenesses or cultural adjustment rather than marks or event to outcome? Yeah, actually this is a little more difficult, right? Because the religious days or the cultural celebrations are quite different for I think, for example, there are some common ones where everyone across the world would celebrate, like a New Year's or an Easter or a Christmas, for example. But then there could be others which are quite centric to a certain region. So like Lunar New Year is very Asian, right? You celebrate it across Southeast Asia, China, Vietnam kind of thing. So that's quite Asian. And then, of course, if you look at Diwali, which is, quite universal as well across the different Indian communities around the world. And then in Europe, there are some, for example, now I'm living in Poland, it's opened my eyes to the different kinds of religious celebrations that, we have here, which are quite Christian or Catholic centric as well. So okay, so what I mean here is that maintaining a common calendar is actually quite important. So we kind of try to get appoint one person across each of the hubs. So we focus on the hubs because that's where our team sit across 3 different hubs in 3 countries. So we have someone who maintains that calendar of, okay, these are all the key kind of public holidays in each of these locations. And then what we do is we also maintain a common annual leave calendar to say, okay, around this particular time we'll have lots of people going on leave because of it's a Easter or and so on and so forth. So then we just try to ensure that the people who are not actually going on leave at that part of the time, because it may not be a holiday for them, will then cover the rest who are actually on holiday, right? So that's what we try to do. And sorry, I just wanted to also share with you that we also have on our intranet, what we try to do is announcements, for example, of some key religious holidays to explain what they're about, so that someone in Mexico understands why we're celebrating a certain, like Lunar New Year in Malaysia and so on and so forth, right? So that also helps to build a little bit of understanding.
I think when you looking at all these different celebrations, coming back to your point about food being a great bringer of people together, I think it's a
Yes.
really easy way to kind of bring people together around, you know, the important foods for those celebrations, and how kind of that kind of sharing experience where once people are sat down and over food, you can talk about actually why do we do this and what are the purpose of it. And it's a great way for, you know, I'd go to every session if there was food there, you know, and learn something about every culture if that was available, but I might not come to a lecture about that culture in the first place. So I kind of bring people in through bits like that.
Yeah, and actually also just to share with you, was a good point, right? One example is that a few years ago we did like a Master Chef event in one of our hubs, and lots of people love to cook. You know, it's bake or cook, etc. It's a common hobby across, you know, regardless of wherever you come from. Not many people love to cook and bake, and why would you not learn about baking or cooking from someone who is a native in that particular, like, you know, a French person making, I don't know, croissants or whatever else have you, right? So we did have a Master Chef competition just focusing on one was, I think it was like Indian food, and one was French food, and that was really good because we had some native people who were from France in the hub, and so they were kind of like the guide there, and they were the Master Chef, and then everyone else did a competition, and then we had prizes and all of that. So again, it's kind of like bringing people together. The other one is spotting, right? So now we have viral fever in this part of the world. So we had a social event in the hub yesterday because one of the games was Poland versus, you know, it's France or something like that. And so we had a little bit of a social event there, like a TV viewing, a soccer viewing or football viewing match. And then we've got a few more lined up now. So, you know, if you kind of like sporting events also do bring people together. So you might have like a team event focus on Olympics team because Olympics is coming, or I don't know, football or whatever that's popular in your part of the world, right?